You're in Austin now?
Yeah, so I just like everybody else throughout COVID was, shelter in place, but then, kind of being by myself or kind of just hanging out in my parents' guest bedroom was kind of taking its toll. And I was like, where do I go? Where can I go? And fortunately, met some incredible friends over the internet over the summer last year, got together in person in the fall. And then again, kind of early this year, everyone's like, hey, let's go get a house. Let's get a couple spots together. And so we got an Airbnb in Austin. Then we just moved out to an incredible ranch here. We have 4 Texas Longhorn steers on the property, and they roam around. And it's like magnificent. And then, lots of open space, lots of sunshine.
Is this kind of hill country?
Yeah, so we're a little bit north of town. We're out in, like towards Spicewood.
Oh yeah. So I lived in Austin 20 years ago.
Okay, nice.
So I know it a little bit. Yeah.
The issue though is something in the air does not agree with me. So my allergies have been flaring up like crazy. Like I'm like barely functioning right now because I just like my sinuses are crazy, like eyes are itchy. I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna muscle through this. We're gonna. There's still work to do.
Wow.
But yeah, it's been fun. So I'm hoping I can stay here and not have to leave Austin. But
who are you there with? Is it a group of friends?
What was that?
Who are you there with? Is it a group of friends that you all have moved together?
Yeah. So a couple of the other guys are pretty, active on socials. We got Dryden Brown, Charlie Callanan, Jack Nasjack.
Oh, cool. I was actually looking at your piece and just like links that people had linked out from it. And I saw Dryden Brown also, and his project seems super interesting too. I would love to talk about like this whole nexus of like new city kind of community reimagination that you guys are probably doing together.
Yeah. So I'm kind of, when we kind of think about our projects, kind of like is like complements to each other because the World's Fair historically has been a great launching pad for like infrastructure projects. And while that's not the goal of a new World's Fair, there's definitely a component of it which would allow us to subsidize the cost of building new towns, new cities, new infrastructure, which is kind of what he and the team at Blue Book are working on, where they're quite literally building like a new city. It's the most like incredible project I've ever heard of. And what they're doing is you guys should talk to Dryden because he can wax poetic about this, but it's sweet because they're aggregating the demand in the cloud, right? Everyone's spread out all over the place. They're doing kind of these houses, these kind of events, community things, and then eventually they're going to pull everyone out of the cloud into a physical city that they're building somewhere in the Mediterranean. Hopefully.
I saw that. That's so cool. And like,
which progress is that? Which project is that?
So it's called Blue Book Cities. Yeah,
Blue Book Cities?
Yeah.
Here's the link.
I'll drop a link in the chat here. Yeah, there we go. But no, it's cool. I'm a firm believer that you're a product of your environment, and more specifically, you're a product of like all of the inputs that you consume. So that conversations you have, it's the articles you read, it's the tweets you consume, it's the movies you watch, it's the books you read. It's also like the food you eat, the like exercise, and it's just like we're a product of all these things. And so the cool thing about what Blue Book's doing, and what I'm kind of leaning into here, is everyone's working on these kind of quote unquote like heroic projects are all kind of coming together and living together. So to a lot of folks, the idea of building a new World's Fair seems like the most absurd thing possible, but it pales in comparison to like some of the other projects people are working on, particularly around like building new cities. So it's just like, it just makes the journey a lot more palatable, a lot more exciting too. It's like, oh, cool, I'm not the only one doing something nuts.
Totally. And it's so resonant with, we were just on with Tom from like Together.casa, talking about all these little components that people are working on, but the overall goal being like people want to live together with other people who share their values and vision, and like the cloud gives us an awesome opportunity to find those people. but there's still like a real magic to in-person connection that like I feel like that link hasn't quite happened yet.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the challenge of the day, right? It's like how do we use the internet as a tool for like use the internet in a way that serves us rather than us being kind of controlled and manipulated by it. I think this kind of hybrid of the physical and the virtual is something we're going to see more and more of, because I don't know about y'all, I don't want to live in the machine. I don't want to live in a VR headset. I don't want to live in a giant tower in the sky, like skyscraper, by myself, having, DoorDash deliver me kind of vitamins and food and all that, and then never see my friends except for in VR. I want to hug my friends. I want to shake hands. I want to go out to dinner and go to concerts and festivals and kind of be in these physical spaces with people. So we gotta keep that physical future vision alive.
Totally. How did you start thinking about all this? Like, when was the inception of kind of reconceptualizing how we're meeting and all the new World Fair stuff?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay.
With his internet, but he'll be back.
Okay. Yeah. So this is fun. I still haven't quite figured out how to, share the quote unquote origin story of the idea here. Like it's been in my mind for a while, because I grew up obsessed with like Disneyland, and a lot of people go to Disneyland because of the rides or because of the characters, or they love going with their family and eating the giant turkey legs, and while those are fantastic, the thing that always like drew me in was this exhibit in Tomorrowland. Right, so you go into the theme park, you step into this kind of new world, and in the Tomorrowland part of the park, there's this kind of pavilion of the future. And I remember just being like completely enamored by this thing when I was a kid, because you'd step in there and they'd have a kitchen that was like you could talk to, and there was games and toys and exhibits and all these things that like were very futuristic. I'm like, why don't we have these? And I would leave and I'd be a little bit like, like, oh, we should, like, why can't I talk to like my sink and have it turn on, or like, why can't I do this or that? Trivial now, but at the time, this is like 2005. It just seemed like the most incredible thing, and just kind of paired with that and the interest in Walt Disney, I had kind of stumbled across some of the work that he did in the past for the 1939 World's Fair and 1964-65 World's Fair in New York. And so growing up, like I'd always known about the World's Fairs. I was kind of disappointed that I could never go to one. And then every time I would fly in and out of Seattle as a kid, I would look at the Space Needle and be like, oh, like why don't we build cool things like that? Yeah. And so really it was like kind of this idea that like was in my subconscious, and kind of was evaluating my next move, that I thought about like getting back into the event space. And this is kind of a longer story, but I did a bunch of kind of events work in undergrad and postgrad, and then took a detour, went into startup land, did growth work at a couple kind of high growth startups, which was a blast. Enough of that to go start a company with Rashab, actually.
Oh, really? No way. Wow.
He's one of my closest friends. Yeah, he's incredible. And then some crazy circumstances happened on my end personally, so I had to kind of step out. Thought like, hey, okay, I'm going to reset my life. I'm going to get kind of everything back together. Invested heavily in my own systems, my routines, my kind of like relationships. That led to doing some travel and some reflection. I'm like, okay, what do I want to do next? I was kind of like, I don't really want to do software. I don't want to go do kind of like just blogging online, although that was kind of the plan. I'm like, more than anything, I want to get back into the physical event space. Like I want to just go pull people together in person. And so I had the brilliant idea about a year ago, maybe a year and a month ago, to come back to the U.S. from Southeast Asia to start a conference company. I'm like, I'm going to go travel around the world, and I'm going to go pull like hundreds or thousands of people together in person to kind of connect and share ideas and kind of share facilitate experiences, ideally in verticals that are focused on the future. So future of food, future of transportation, future of housing, because historically I've seen the power of kind of getting people together in the same room who may not always talk to each other. And so, that was a year ago. I come back to the US, all my conference travel plans get canceled because of COVID. I still want to do kind of this kind of build the future, get people excited about what the world could be, ethos. And so I'm like, okay, well, what can I do for my bedroom? So I started a bunch of discussion groups. I was going to run an online conference. Ended up kind of morphing that into a podcast that I've been running for the past year. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, what does this turn into? Where does this go? Yeah. Because I think the other challenge that I saw back in March was, March, April, when we thought that everyone was going to die from COVID, and not to downplay all the terrible deaths and resulting kind of consequences from that. It's just it's not as severe as we thought it was going to be. But it revealed to me we actually don't have any real leadership in the world, right? Because if we did, we would have had anyone step up and say, "Hey, everybody, this is going to be really tough, right? We don't know what this thing's going to be. We don't know how to handle this, but we're going to figure it out. We're going to keep you updated." We didn't have that, and our institutions, academic, political, financial, media, no one was kind of at the wheel. It was this kind of weird mess. Yeah. I'm well, clearly we need some organization that provides us leadership. Or we need leaders across the board, but particularly in the context of what our future looks like. So I'm okay, how do we build a future-focused institution or organization? And I'm okay, I'll run this podcast, and then I'll do some events, and then maybe just maybe somewhere down the road we'll run a World's Fair. And I met some great people. They were like, "Hey, that idea is not crazy. You should go do that." Yeah. And as I was kind of looking for something that I could work on for a very, very, very long time, 10, 20 years, because I'm tired of bouncing around between ideas. Yeah. I'm the World's Fair thing is doable. We can make this thing happen. Yeah. And so in the fall, I was sitting on it, thinking about it, and then kind of formally started working on okay, well, how do we actually go make this thing happen in January? And the piece kind of served to kick that off. That was a long-winded answer to your question. I'm a little I need more water and more sleep. So I apologize if I'm rambling.
It's so organic. I feel like you had this jigsaw puzzle of experiences in your life that have brought you to wanting to put this thing together. And I think it would be probably odd and stilted if you had the perfect kind of plan for exactly what you wanted to do already at this point with it. I'm curious, what was the podcast and how did that evolve into, what sorts of events did you find interesting, or what were the moments of magic that you have found bringing people together that you're trying to amplify and recreate here?
Yeah, well, I think the most magical moment for me was they're three. So can I walk you through each of those?
Yeah.
Three. Okay,
and so I also see Nadia in the audience. We were all reading your piece together. I posted the Google Doc link. We were highlighting, commenting on it. So I'll get her up in case she wants to ask some questions too. But yeah, go for it. 3 magical moments.
Okay, I'm writing these down so I can maintain my train of thought here. So the first kind of, and this is kind of magical moments for me in what brought me to wanting to do kind of events and experiences. So the first one was I was attending. This is perhaps a story for another day or for later. I was attending a military boarding. I sent myself to military boarding school when I was 14 to avoid going to avoid getting in trouble for some things that I was doing. I had kind of an epiphany moment. But at the school, it was very intellectually isolating because I thought, oh, hey, I'll go to this boarding school, military boarding school, and I'll meet other people there who want to better themselves. And I'm that's absurd. No one's I'm probably literally the only person who has sent themselves to a military boarding school, thinking that, it would, there's no, everyone else gets sent there because, they're smoking pot, yeah, stealing liquor from their parents' liquor cabinet, threw a huge party when their parents left town. It's not a common thing. But so I ended up kind of retreating into the kind of like internet and finding some solace in kind of the tech startup community. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to graduate and I'm going to go to Silicon Valley and I'm going to go like start a startup, because that seemed to be like the last place where you could like exert influence on the world, where you can actually like make a difference. So you can go the corporate route, you can go there's like lots of life paths, but the one that seemed to kind of provide the most autonomy and give people the ability to like change things was through like a startup. So I wasn't quite sure where to start. And like no one at my school was like, oh, like let's go start startups. And I came across this event that now is kind of faded from the zeitgeist, Startup Weekend. And I think Techstars bought it now. I don't know if they still do it, but I remember like coming across it on like some website, and I signed up for it in Seattle. And I flew back home for the holidays for Thanksgiving. My dad picked me up from the airport, and we rushed to get to the opening ceremony of Startup Weekend. And I was like 16, 17 at the time. Like, and I kind of walked in this room with people who were like in their 20s and 30s, people who were like building things. And it was this incredible experience for me, because I just got like absorbed into this bubble where people were optimistic and they cared about the same things I cared about. And they always like listened to me and listened to my ideas and didn't think that I was like this young kid wanting to kind of try and do things and change things. And so for me, it was this really special weekend where I felt the power of community and of kind of like optimism. And that wouldn't have happened like for me if I wouldn't have kind of probably stayed on the same trajectory if I hadn't had the ability to kind of get together with people and had that support and encouragement. So just kind of like Startup Weekend is like something near and dear to my heart, and has heavily influenced kind of the work I've done since, like creating those spaces where people can come in, feel optimistic, feel excited, and be believed in, and then kind of that there's like magic that comes from that. So that's the first. But Nadia, hello, welcome.
Hey, nice to meet you. Nadia had some awesome thoughts on your piece too. And by the way, Nadia is part of the South Park Commons Founder Fellowship, and so she's nice. Like very much, I'm sure, experiencing this like same magic of like, you know, bringing together very similar people with similar values in this like magical startup tech headspace.
Yeah. So what I'm not like what I'm saying resonates with you, given like South Park Commons stuff. It's like
it super does. It super does, especially like what you just said about like finding folks who like don't think that you're crazy for wanting to like make a difference. Like, I mean, I had my own sort of like unconventional path, but I super relate, and it's like kind of a magical place and like special and wild, and I don't know, it's exciting.
Yeah, it's like this, and I think this is what attracted everybody to San Francisco or Silicon Valley. You know, for the past since like 2005 or whatever. It was like just this place where everyone was supportive. Everyone wanted you to go try like your hand to doing whatever you wanted to do. Like nothing was impossible. And I think that ethos, that mentality is extremely valuable and kind of lacking in the world today at large. Like, we want people to dream big. We want people to try things and be okay with failure. And like, it's okay. Like, we're not going to get anywhere if everyone's just kind of like waiting around for someone else to do something. Like, if you believe in the future, if you believe in like something, if you really care about, I'm trying to come up with some like trivial example, but it like it's at large. Like if you care about something, like go work on it. Like people want to support you. You can find your community on Twitter now. Like you can find people who really believe in you, or just like believe in kind of the fact that you want to go do something. You want to take responsibility for like enacting change in the world. And like that's
where have you found those people the most? Like where have you found your people the most like deeply and kind of resonantly in the world or online actually?
I mean, I think a lot of it, I was very fortunate, like in undergrad, I kind of kicked off, like all of my closest friends and relationships have come from these events that I've organized. So in undergrad, Startup Weekend was not really a thing at my university. So I'm like, well, I've seen the power of this. We need to do this here. And so I kind of created this, you know, beacon, this signal that would, you know, bring those people together, give them a unique shared experience, and then allow relationships to flourish from there. And so a lot of the kind of closest friends that I have now came from my work on that on Startup Weekends in undergrad, and then a few of the other projects that I ran. Outside of that, though, it bothers me because I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter, but I think there's something special to it. You can start broadcasting your ideas, you can follow people, you can have conversations with anybody, and it's some real magic happens. I wouldn't be I met Dryden. I actually met Dryden through a mutual friend who I met on Twitter.
Wow, that's crazy. I love that.
Slack. And I honestly, I have an absurd amount of confidence in myself, but I don't think I would have been able to kind of come to the conclusion the World's Fair is something to actually be serious about working on if I didn't have honestly Dryden and a few other folks who were no, this isn't great, you should definitely go do this, right? You need those people in your life who you and kind of provide you that that push in the direction you ultimately want to go in, that you may have some resistance to kind of pursuing on your own, especially if you're working solo, right? It's easy to get kind of trapped in these local maximas or in these pits where you're I don't know if this makes sense, and then if you don't have anyone kind of nudging you or helping, kind of giving you a hand out, it's tough.
I think it's nice to, in a sense, normalize the process and make it kind of the default or the expectation that you're going to do things that are really challenging. Because if everybody around you is doing things that are challenging, it just feels much more reasonable to do, even though you haven't reduced the risk in in a way that you could point to. You actually have reduced the risk by increasing your confidence, which projects into the world, which helps aggregate more people who are excited about those things. So I think it actually, people say you're the personality or average of the 5 people you spend most time with. And I think that, there's some truth to that, especially when it comes to doing these risky, ambitious things.
Yeah, I'm all in on that. Like I said earlier, you're the product of your environment. That also kind of connects with the people you spend time with. And so if you're I don't know if y'all have experienced this, but I found myself in kind of headspaces believing certain things that probably in retrospect aren't true or were not the healthiest things to believe. And I realized I had these beliefs.
Can we talk about an example there? What would be an example of something that maybe you've updated your belief system around?
I love asking people this.
I mean, there are quite a few. I think the one that I think is most, it's not really relevant anymore, but kind of around in I hate talking about politics, but I think that it's a pretty clear example of if you're watching mainstream media, or if you are kind of in certain circles on Twitter, or if you are even just kind of if you're around people who are kind of consuming information that's kind of mass media or promoted through mass media, your information diet's their information diet's not good, and that's going to kind of permeate through your conversations, and then you find yourself trapped in space where this issue is black and white, and it's actually it's way more complicated. And so I don't really want to riff on specifics there, but I think just at large, if you kind of evaluate, where am I getting my information? What am I consuming? Oh, okay, this may be why I'm feeling really frustrated or anxious about this thing. It's because everyone around me is talking about it. Okay, I'll give you an example. The fires in San Francisco, right? It's if you were in San Francisco when the smoke was there, you would think hell was breaking loose, because that's what everyone was talking about. Everyone was talking about how the fires were the worst thing to ever happen, and if you're living there, you feel it, and the sky is orange, and you're the apocalypse is happening, right? But if you step out of that and you stop consuming kind of this the narrative, it's bad, but we don't have to be kind of fearful and anxious about it. There's no need to freak out. It's okay, we should probably do something about this. We definitely should do something about this, but we don't need to be, stirring with anxiety over it,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that
we talked about this a little bit yesterday with just and how so many social media and news engagement is sort of the core metric, and I think in some ways it's led to this polarization of content where it's almost like the junk food diet, where you're okay, I'm gonna keep eating the things that are getting me more and more worked up, but actually it's no longer a balanced picture of what's going on in the world, or what is reality.
100%.
Yeah.
So we actually had turned. Oh, go ahead, Misty.
No, you go ahead.
Well, maybe I was gonna change. So if you had a topic, I actually wanted to get deeper into. I think we've all read the piece now, and I wanted to get deeper into understanding like what is actually on your mind, Cam. Like because I think from the piece it sounds like it. I mean, I could imbue a lot of my own imagination, expectations, etc., on what it is in your mind, but maybe I think it's like exciting and inspiring and a broad, interesting idea. But then I also wonder, like, what are the kind of tactical steps that you imagine, and what does it look like in the 3 month, 6 month, 1 year, 10-year time frame?
Yeah, totally. That's kind of the exciting thing, and I tried to write that piece as kind of like broadly as I could, because I want people, I want everyone to read it and get their imagination like stirring, like, oh, what could this be? And it was very, very intentional, because developing and designing and organizing the New World's Fair is a non-trivial effort. Like, this is like, I'm not the one to, I'm not going to be here like on my laptop doing this whole thing, right? Like, the role that I am trying to fill is like the beacon. I have the energy, the enthusiasm. I believe, like, at my core, that we need to shift the culture such that people are excited about the future again, and give people role models and new things to aspire towards. And only by doing that are we going to be able to one, solve the problems that we have in the world, but two, like, reach heights that we've never could have even imagined possible, which is what I wrote in the piece. And so I'm here like, hey, this is a beacon. Like, get excited about this. Contact me. Let's go make this thing happen. And then kind of pulling people into conversations to figure out, like, hey, David, like, what do you want to see? Adia, what do you want to see? Mm-hmm. What do you want to see? Like, what do you imagine the world's fairs to be? And then kind of, again, like, customer development. It's like, what does everyone want? What are people, like, when they read that, what stirs in their brains, and like, how are they envisioning this thing? And then we can kind of take this collage of ideas and morph it into something incredible. But at a high level, kind of following the themes of the World's Fairs of the past, where they're physical, they're like multi-month, and they are built to sustain kind of tens of millions of people, right? This is not we're not trying to do another South by Southwest. We're not trying to do another CES. We're literally trying to, we are going to build like a hub, like a little pop-up city where people from all around the country, all around the world can travel in to meet, like, experience the future and kind of visualize their role in it. And that does not happen, in niche, like, this isn't a niche event. This isn't a, small scale. This is how do we actually get people aligned around where we want to go? But the specifics of the content will morph and change based on kind of the technologies that are available, things that are coming down the pipeline, and kind of what people want to see. So I'm intrigued by the idea, and it dovetails on something we were discussing yesterday, which we were actually kind of riffing on some ideas with Nadia about how sometimes you kind of want to zig when everyone else is zagging. And everybody kind of assumes everything should be online, and there's all these reasons to be online, and it's it's easier there, and you can assemble the whole world and stuff. And I think while everybody's looking at that, I think it's interesting to look at the opposite, kind of the complement of that. So I think I'm naturally intrigued by the idea of doing kind of an offline, big, ambitious build, physical world thing. But I think when doing the complement, I would want to identify what are like the abstract pieces of that are like uniquely enabled now. So I think if we say, okay, World's Fair should be physical because it used to be physical, like, sure, that makes sense. That certainly could be the reason. But I think there's also like something new, which is like everything, so much happens online today, whether that's, Fortnite is a form of physical space, or maybe some Roblox or Minecraft stuff, or lots of kind of virtual spaces. And so are there things that we can learn from what works in virtual spaces that we can then take into physical spaces and make physical spaces newer and more alive and kind of
not necessarily connected to virtual spaces, but better ways to organize the physical spaces, given that we have I don't know, GPS and the ability to network information and communication and stuff. Like one thing, just total riff, but talk about like Fire Chat and Open Garden, and like making mesh hubs of communication, where you actually can have a decentralized internet, not reliant on traditional internet backbone, like Bluetooth, BLE, and stuff, to like create kind of a mesh. You can imagine that'd be like a cool kind of demo that you could do if you had a bunch of futurist thinking people all in a physical space together, and then you kind of are, in a sense, building a more decentralized internet and showcasing what that looks like, almost as like a side effect of like this other whatever else is happening. You're having a Ferris wheel, or I don't know all of what what you imagine, but I think there's interesting ways to think about like the zig and the zag, and then what can we kind of import from the virtual world to like make this kind of experience better.
100%. I think the kind of underlying belief here in doing the physical is we don't want to live in a purely virtual future, right? It's easy for us to kind of sit on our laptops and write code and create content and like ship things online because there are no gatekeepers. But we can't let this kind of friction in the real world prevent us from actually building things, because otherwise we're going to like end up, 10, 20 years from now, having our physical world kind of decayed and like be beyond repair while we're thriving in the virtual world. And so like my personal belief is like, I want the future to be a symbiosis of the physical and the virtual, where we're pulling the best parts of each and kind of combining them. And the World's Fair being physical is kind of like me and the organization kind of planting our flag in the ground saying, no, we believe in a physical world, like a thriving physical world, as well as a thriving virtual one. I mean, just like riffing on why physical, as so many people talk a lot. It's like, I'm sure y'all have been to like soccer games or like concerts. Mm-hmm. I mean, trivially, like dinners with friends. Like nobody, like COVID revealed that like there's a lot of incredible things that we can do online. Like we're having this conversation, which is great, but it's also revealed that we don't want to just do dinners over Zoom with our friends. We don't want to like watch concerts online. Like people are doing them because it's like the option. But like, I don't think the future should be that. I don't believe the future should be that way. And like, someone has to have an opinion there.
Yeah. I'm actually interested to try to like riff a little bit all together about what like, so we've all, I think, thought pretty deeply about this balance between like virtual and physical world, and what instantiations do we want to see of the things that you're thinking about? Like one thing that comes to mind for me is kind of sustained community, like communal living type setups versus like one-time events, or how those would relate. Because like when we were talking to Tom, one thing that really resonated was, I mean, I've always wanted to find like a house of writers or like creatives that I could live with. And, the internet's a great place to like find those people and then go live with them in the real world. Then you also have this like fair idea where it's like this burst of, almost like Burning Man, like burst of energy that you get together, and then people probably like percolate, form their own connections, and like interesting things come out of that. But yeah, I mean, maybe those could even be more in sync, where that becomes like a gathering ground. You expect that you'll find your people of some sort, and then maybe that becomes like a co-living situation for the next 6 months or something. Like, who knows?
This is like a little bit of a tangent, but like Mishti, what you just said like makes me think about like, in some ways it's like, how do you go back to like this thing that existed and was magical, but like what makes it like uniquely relevant right now? And it's almost like, I was thinking about like, I went on this whole like lunchtime tangent of like food, and like I think there's the example of like Beyond Meat and like how it's like reinventing this thing, and it's a very physical experience of like trying it at this new World Fair. And it's almost like Alinea or something like that, where you're like, how do we take this thing that like is familiar, but like reinvent it to be like uniquely relevant to like the time we're in now? And I think there's something interesting there about like the interplay, where it's like, how does a technology that's sort of at the cusp today enable this to exist in a way that like it couldn't in the past, but has that same feeling of like energy and excitement and like community? And like, I don't know, I'm curious, like what are those things that like would be really, really exciting. There are a lot of cool examples. And I think like to your point about sort of like, like how do you reimagine like living and community and like almost like Olympic Village, but for creators, like that's very interesting. So I'm curious, like what are other things where people are like, oh man, like this would be really like a cool twist on this.
Yeah.
That's this is, I mean, that's a great question. I think that's why like these discussions are important. It's like, what are all the ideas? Because again, like I said, like I'm not coming up with all of them. It's like not all flowing out of my brain. It's like, how do we take everyone? Because I have a certain lens through which I view the world. It's like, and that's, I mean, we all have very narrow lenses. It's like, where can we kind of overlap to create a better composite picture? I mean, but just on that, I mean, like we want people experiencing kind of the things that they see, like online, like supersonic flight, like autonomous vehicles, like the Hyperloop. Like the reason we don't build these things is because people like don't seem to care. But it's not because they don't want them. It's because like they just feel like it's never going to affect them. But if we can put people into a Hyperloop, into an autonomous car, or have them eat like a cell-based meat burger, and be like, oh wow, this is really cool. Like we should have this. And that's going to kind of change the way that they view the world. Instead of feeling disenfranchised by, Silicon Valley and the tech elite, it becomes more accessible and more familiar and kind of dives down kind of the like things that will change their day-to-day lives.
Yeah. Totally. Like what if you had, I don't know, what if one instantiation of the World Fair was people who have expressed an interest in sort of thinking about invention and the future and progress in this way come together. Maybe people bring things they're working on. Maybe you have like outside larger organizations like Hyperloop present things or whatever. But what if there was some sort of commitment that like at the end of it, everyone like promises to either like live with other people they've met in some sort of house, or like basically like is there a way to form lasting community out of that otherwise ephemeral interaction? Because that's one thing I felt with a lot of kind of like conferences and fairs, that there's this like burst of energy and then it dissipates and I end up having like one-on-one relationships that continue, but that like collective, like Nadia was saying, the Olympic Village, like how do you get the Olympic Village to sort of thrive on after the Olympics? Maybe that's where the virtual comes in. It's really useful, or maybe they're just like other behavioral things to play with. I think that'd be super interesting to think about.
Yeah, we can definitely like, and that's kind of one of the brilliant things about the power of the internet, of the technology that we have, is we can kind of connect people in ways that we couldn't before, and we can, if you have 100,000 or 1 million people coming to an event or coming to a physical space, like how do you line up who should meet whom? And like if you're interested in the future of food, 10 years ago, we couldn't customize your itinerary to make sure that you're going to like food related events, you're meeting other food entrepreneurs, or you're like being introduced to ideas in that space you had never thought of. Now we can do that. And so like for me, when I'm thinking about the program itself, like the specifics are a bit vague, but the idea that you can get like an itinerary that's custom designed to you and what you want to see in the sort of future you want to participate in is something we can 100% do. And then as a result, we have all the information of the people who share those interests. And so we can connect people after the fact. And in the one piece that I alluded to the one thing that I alluded to in the piece that I have not explicitly stated, but I will explicitly state it right now, is like, we're not building one World's Fair. Like the objective is not just like run this thing and be like, hey, everybody, cool, sayonara, like let's go build the future. It's like the World's Fair organization needs to serve as kind of the North Star, is that, if you will.
Are building out. And so, especially since you've iterated on a couple startups, and then in this interview you were saying that you kind of wish that you'd done a little bit more like no-code stuff at the beginning of Atmos. I just wanted to ask you about that, like what your experience has been across the 3 startups you did, what your take is on like what sorts of tools would you use now if you were again like at day -50 of building Atmos and iterating on what sort of made sense to dig deeper on.
It would have been good to do everything manually from the beginning. The only hard part on from an Atmos standpoint is building homes take a long time, so we would have gone through building a few houses before ever.
Oh, did we lose?
We might have lost Nick.
Maybe it's internet.
Nick, are you still there? Might have been an internet problem.
Still here. We might have. I'll just text him.
By the way, for those following along, I'm adding the buildatmos.com is the website for the Atmos we're talking about. There's a few potential name conflicts. I just want to make sure we're all looking at the same thing.
Yeah.
It looks like today they're operating in Charlotte, North Carolina, Durham, North Carolina, and Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Which makes me wonder what is happening. Why North Carolina? Is there something special about the regulatory environment there, or is there something about kind of the home building materials or expertise? Or?
Yeah, we should definitely ask about that.
Oops.
Okay, I see him in the front row now.
All right. Nick, are you still there? Let's give it a second. Looked like.
Yep.
All right, Nick, you still there?
Yep.
There.
So, quick note. It looks like when your internet goes out, comes back in, it still shows me on stage, but it didn't seem like you guys saw me on stage.
Right. Did you refresh? Or
yeah, I refreshed.
I did. Okay, cool.
Sorry about that. Bad internet.
All good.
I love it. So we were talking about.
Saying, back through. So you said you wish you had done more things manually, but that's also tricky because building homes takes a really long time.
Yeah, but still, from like I guess a general perspective, like there, I think something I've seen now work for a few other startups as well. But this is how we initially started, but then ended up having to iterate anyways because it was just taking so long. Was like basically treat yourself as like a service, whatever your kind of end state is. Try to solve that manually and just provide that like a high touch service to the people that have the problem, and try to set up processes that make that a bit easier, and then figure out whether that's through like engineering automations or whatever it might be, and then productize the portions that a user should be able to take on themselves, that maybe are like decisions or finding kind of the intersections that of where complications happen. So for us, when building a home, there's a lot of back and forth and like pushes and pulls on what you can do where. So taking into account which lots can handle which homes based on comps in the area, based on the actual setback requirements, all these different variables that then make it to where someone's like, okay, well, I really like this lot, but I also like this house, but they don't work together in my price point, so I need to start adjusting certain things. Maybe I can change my lot if I want to keep my house. And so all these things start to like push and pull each other. And it was about figuring out how a product can allow a user to do those things themselves, rather than a human having to go back and forth with that person and figure out what those things are. So to kind of recap, I think the key is starting with some sort of high-touch service or ways in which you can do it manually, learning where the core problems are and where most of the interactions happen, and then if there's a way to productize and let the user do that themselves.
And it seems like it's a multi-party kind of transaction you're coordinating, and I'll maybe guess, but like there's certainly whoever's the homeowner probably also owns that land, and then there's like some sort of builder or set of build contributors and kind of part suppliers, and then I got to imagine like depending on like the place, there might be like regulatory hurdles to overcome, and possibly even like neighborhood or HOA hurdles to overcome. So
Yep.
I wonder, when you're sort of in that manual process, have you met and touched each of those entities, and sort of have you found new surprising discoveries about what's easy or what's hard, depending on kind of the your relationships with each of those entities?
Yeah, definitely. So there's, like you mentioned, there's many parties involved. As for as we started to systematize a lot of this, we found that a lot of things could be moved up front. There was like redundancy that ends up happening between people, just because they're disconnected from each other. And so it became like, how do we reduce that redundancy, and because we have full transparency into the process, versus it's usually like this customer who doesn't understand the process is taking information from one to another, and they don't really know where the redundancy exists, so they're just kind of doing whatever they're told. And so this is at least the case with us, where when there's a lot of parties involved, it seems like there's an easy way to find redundancy when you systematize or are part of the entire process, versus just trying to eat at one part of the process itself.
And just to make sure I understand, the redundancy would be that maybe I, as a homeowner, want to build an Atmos, and maybe Mishti, as a separate homeowner, wants to build an Atmos, and we run into the same problems that the platform should be able to solve. Is that what you mean by redundancy?
Yeah, an example would be more so like when we first get a lot into the process, you go and get a survey done to understand what can work where, or given constraints. And then let's say you go to a different builder, and the builder may have their own surveyor, because they have to get what is called a site plan at the end. Once you have your home selected and you place it, what goes into permitting is basically another survey. But if it wasn't done by that surveyor, they may not reuse the initial one did. So you have to get it takes 3 more weeks, because you have to send out that surveyor versus just reusing what was already there. So there's like little minute things like that all throughout this process that you start to be able to like streamline, because you're a part of it from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. And how does, I assume that actually plays a large part when you get into any kind of regulatory, municipal policy, permits, et cetera, that like, any individual homeowner who would be considering this, maybe has never or rarely interacted around getting a permit like this, whereas you can kind of systematize that across everybody who has interest. So have you I noticed when I was on the website that there's, I think, 3 locations all in North Carolina that are suggestions. Is that because you happen to already have a lot of the kinks worked out there? And how many of those kinks are like, the permitting versus the materials or build talent, or what causes North Carolina to have maybe some similarities there?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, we're focused on just Raleigh, Durham, and Charlotte as our initial markets. The reason being is that a lot of real estate is hyper-localized, both, as you mentioned, from a permitting and zoning requirement perspective to the actual architectural codes. But we're also seeing it play out that it's really important when trying to get a network effect to happen, to be focused locally, because everyone knows everyone, especially in real estate, whether that's the realtor having a partnered builder they work with, or a partnered lender, or these other aspects in that builder having 3 other realtors that they work with, and they're just being this like chain of a network that we can take advantage of, versus trying to like rebuild that and recreate that, so leverage that. And so us making it super localized has been a key piece of both being able to get off the ground and take advantage of those things. But on the opposite side, also for the platform to be more streamlined, having plans and such that are focused locally makes our process much easier as well.
Are you based in North Carolina personally, or you're somewhere else?
No, I'm originally from Raleigh, Durham, but I'm in San Francisco right now. Was in Charlotte for about a month as of 2 days ago, and I'll be back there in a few weeks as well. Just kind of going back.
It seems like there's a lot of like value you get from kind of on the ground, talking to, building relationships with the permitting offices and building relationships with the builders and the financial entities and stuff.
That's for sure.
So do do you right now recognize sort of commonalities across prospective buyers, like what they're hoping to get out of it? Like, are they building this because they want, they have an elderly, maybe some parents that they want to be able to live on property, or is it like a nanny situation or an Airbnb situation, or kind of all of the above? How does it typically break down?
Yeah. I don't know how many of these snippets I want to share. Like, we're just kind of giving away all of the secrets.
No worries. No. If it's super confidential, we're just trying to have fun and hang out and learn about it. So yeah,
it's not as super confidential. It's like, once I outline, here's exactly how you make this company work. It's just like,
I feel like it's such an ambitious project that like nobody would.
Yeah, we're just kind of odd.
Unless they already,
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely happy to share all this. There's just like very obvious. I think this goes back to being there locally and actually talking to partners, talking to builders, realtors, developers, customers. There's a very clear hole in the market where on the custom side, because most custom builders work on the higher end portion, like $1 million+ price range. They'll make a few $100,000 a home, so they only have to do like 3 or 4 houses a year to be like really well off. But because of that, they're super high touch points. So they're going back and forth with the client. They have some of these processes set up. But where you start to see that disappear is you get into the lower price ranges, anywhere from like $400K to $1 million, and no longer do those builders exist or want to play in it, because they have to do 2-3x more homes each year and handhold, but it's just as much work. Like it's not any less work for them,
right?
And so they just don't do it, and so you have like lower end builders or like speccers who will fill that space, but they don't care about customers, and so it's a horrible experience for most clients in that, and people tend to shy away from it in those price ranges and think it's not feasible, but it is. And so what we're trying to do is take that off of those builders' plates and make those processes ourselves, and then leverage the platform for more of the design selection portion of it and pricing, so that the spec builder feels like it's still a spec home. Like they're just getting it at the very end of the process. Here's your build. Here's the home.
Got it. So you're sort of taking, I guess, in the market today, these spec builders on the, call it like lower to medium end spec builders do operate, but they today end up kind of doing it all. And if I understand right, your value prop in working with them is you sort of like solve a lot of the marketing and customer acquisition and process stuff so that they can focus more on like the thing they're good at.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it does feel like a good pattern for how the internet generally works, which is like, if somebody's really high end and there's enough margin, technology doesn't really improve that stuff because there's a lot of other like hand-to-hand relationship stuff. Whereas when you have, the promise of technology is being able to take processes which are kind of broken or too expensive and create a lot more efficiency so that it can be more accessible to more people. And, maybe we started, 30 years ago with information, and now that's kind of, not solved, but we're well along the way to having more information available to more people. But I think we also see, I think it's a very different business, but I think something like Open Door is in kind of, in the real estate and kind of simplifying real estate transactions. And I think that, you could look around the world before Open Door, and there were services trying to do similar things, but kind of in a, like disaggregated, not very efficient way. And I think it causes sometimes, not the best actors to get recognized for being good actors. And so it kind of, before you have a good technology platform with a strong brand, it's harder to give the good people credit for being as good as they are. Whereas I think when you have a technology platform like what you're building with Atmos, you should be able to like find the best contractors and give them credit for being the best contractors. Whereas the world that exists today, it's kind of like maybe something closer to who markets better or who has the, cheaper rate by, $1,000 or something. Whereas if somebody's like actually really, great practitioner of their craft and really high quality, maybe harder for them to differentiate. But with a trusted platform and brand, I think you actually create the opportunity to make it easier for them to differentiate on just focusing on quality and not having to sort of worry about all the marketing and operational details. So that, it seems actually very consistent, just sort of my observations, not asking you to share the secret sauce, but my observations would be that it is very consistent with the shapes of things that the internet, kind of enabled and that we look for. Yeah,
I completely agree. I mean, I definitely think with, especially on the builders front, like, because most of these builders are like your small mom and pops, like one or two people, they don't, again, going back to it, don't tend to have customer facing parties, whereas the larger builders or the builders that are doing higher end, like you said, hire people just specifically to be high touch point individuals, and like they can have a salesperson in their process. And so, I think then customers start to correlate their customer relationship with the quality of their build, when that's not the case, where like they may still be an insanely good builder, like you said.
Yep.
And that just doesn't get recognized. So I completely agree.
Yeah, totally. Assad actually had a question. I'm going to bring him up so you can ask. Hey, how's it going?
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, welcome.
Hey, thanks, David, Mishti. Good to see you guys again. Nicholas, good to see you. Just like building, kind of following on to some of the things you were saying about being smaller and more mom and pop for some of the builders you're working with, and how have from COVID, things like material shortages in the construction market kind of impacted timelines? And do you think that kind of maybe impacts the customer experience a little bit when they're like, damn it, can't buy lumber or whatever those might be? So would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah. From at least timeline perspective, because it's been happening so long now, a lot of builders have been getting a little bit more intelligent and ordering things earlier than they necessarily usually would. And I know some who are even just like stockpiling in warehouses materials of sorts if they know how many builds they're doing, or if they've already signed a certain amount. And at least on the pricing side, we've definitely have fallen into some difficulties there. What we just try to do in general is not have customers push the upper bounds of their price point, so that there is a little wiggle room in case something does go higher than expected. But we've had experiences where we've had to reduce our fee or something along the lines of that because of just the circumstances, especially when everything first hit and lumber started skyrocketing for the first time, and everyone was just like, I have no clue what's going on. So I guess the two pieces there, it's just like we're trying from a customer perspective take into account pricing and their budget and try to push them lower than they would usually. And then from a builder perspective, just preempting some of the orders that they usually would do later on.
Got it. That's super helpful. And just one quick follow-on question, if I could just tack in there. So I guess I'm getting into that phase where I'm looking to potentially buy a home, and I'll look here and there, and like I'm in Houston, Texas, right? So we've got like 4 or 5 major builders, and they'll buy out kind of most of, call it, greenfield space, right? So there's not that much kind of empty space where you can go construct these homes in, call it, desirable areas, unless you go buy a home, wreck it, and then go from scratch. So how do you guys compete with like the David Weekleys and kind of the DR Hortons and some of these folks, and where do you see them in these markets?
Yeah, so we're not trying to compete with the builders themselves. Like, we see ourselves as more of a platform for them. What we're working on right now is trying to partner with like developers, builders, and realtors that have lots of their own, and see us as more of like a Zillow of sorts, but for building, than necessarily a competitor directly to these. As for the actual shortages themselves, a lot of these localized realtors, builders, and developers will go and find those lot opportunities that you're mentioning with teardowns and subdivide them into small little pockets for just like higher end homes or like specs that they'll usually do.
Awesome, thank you.
How does the financing for these things work? Do you is it typically well understood as like a real estate kind of mortgage or kind of an expansion of a mortgage, or do you get involved in the financing or partner with it, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we partner with it currently. They basically, there's two loans that a customer will take out. There's a lot loan and a construction and perm loan. We're trying to push those into the same, and basically the lot loan will help them buy the lot, and then the construction perm will handle all the construction portion, and that's where we usually get our fee out of. Throughout the build process, basically there's like 4 or 5 phases that the bank will give draws to the builder, and then that's when they use those to order the construction materials at each given phase. But you can do some preemptively, only a certain amount though. And then at the very end of the build, it'll transfer into a normal 30-year mortgage. But throughout the year or so of the build itself, they only pay interest on the home. So they'll pay like little to nothing, like $50 a month kind of thing. And the whole, where a lot of people see value is the fact that the builder doesn't have to take out the loan themselves and take on all the risk and leverage and over leverage themselves. They can focus on speccing still. So
that's cool. I also wanted to ask you about the home buyer side. Like, what kind of stories have you found the most surprising in terms of who ends up being customers or wanting to use this, and for what sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of actual like builds, there have definitely been some like unique like people, since we've started with more on the custom side, like fully custom. There's like, we've had a family, they're doing like there's like 3 families subdividing a lot and building all next to each other. And they're building like a Buddhist temple for the 3 of them.
It's so epic.
Wow. And then they're building like a half-court basketball court inside their house, like one of them. We've had people do like doggy showers. We've had people do secret bookshelves into their like offices. There's a lot of just like interesting things people end up doing. So yeah.
That's really cool. Also, that 3 families are sort of coordinating using Atmos as a platform. Because I'd sort of just been thinking like single player basically, but you could probably do pretty awesome things with. Because we were talking about the future of community with Cam earlier and with Tom, but massively useful for anyone who wants to really build this from the ground up, especially for like people who have families.
Yeah, one of the I saw this Twitter post probably a few weeks ago. It was this person saying like, I wish they would legalize bungalow like courts. So basically, like, it's one plot of land that everyone owns, but they each have like their own bungalow within that, and you and your friends can just go build like a bungalow court.
Yeah, that's cool. It reminds me of. Have you ever read any of Phil Levin's stuff?
I have not.
Do you know Phil? Phil works on Cul-de-sac, which is relevant space, very different product and service offering. But he's oh cool, yeah. So Phil he started effectively like a commune in San Francisco, like, I don't know, a decade ago. And I think he's moved it out to, many, many similar people involved. Maybe they're out like somewhere in East Bay, maybe Oakland or so. But basically he's just somebody who's like very passionate about this. I know he's passionate about this, and I feel like I've met a bunch of other people that also have that flavor of, like, some group of people want to get together and buy a kind of big undeveloped property, and they want to be able to kind of get the best of community and co-living while being able to have kind of their own space. And it feels like, maybe there's stuff you can do that would simplify that whole kind of build ownership package. Does that feel, is that too bizarre and too far out, or is that stuff that you guys think about even today?
Yeah, and again, I think this is where the new version of the site's going to be definitely interesting. I think it's not that far out that we start branching beyond just homes and single lots, especially when you start being able to edit a lot already for one home. Like, it's not that much more difficult to add a second, third, fourth to that. especially if you have if you understand the constraints there. Again, once this core infrastructure is set up, it scales pretty easily across the board, whether that's even going more into commercial. But yeah, I think the dream state is people being able to come on here and imagine entire communities or cities, hopefully, and design those. And either that's like gather people who are interested in actually buying into it, similar to like a Kickstarter of sorts, or if you have friends already that you want to collaborate with, then doing that. And to give an example, I was talking to one of the founders of Casper back in our first fundraise, I think, and him and like 9 of his friends. I think one of them's like one of the MTV co-founders or something as well. And they were all going to go up to like upstate New York and buy a huge plot of land and subdivide it themselves and build around each other and just have, especially during COVID, like just a community of their own. So I think there's a huge common thread here, and I think a lot of people are thinking about it on a micro level, and then there's a lot of people thinking about it on a macro level with entire cities that they're wanting to start. If you saw like Justin Kahn mentioning that as well. So.
I didn't see that. What was Justin? He's doing something in co-living?
On Bookface, he had announced a bit back that I think him and a few others are starting to try to build a city or something like that.
Cool.
And I know like Tom Courier's doing that as well, I think, and a few others that have reached out to me. I think everyone just sees us as like the ones who will actually build it for them. So
right. Yeah. What is the Praxis Blue Book thing? Praxis that we were touching on earlier. Is that also related? I just saw the links go by in chat, but I'm not deep on it. Are those related orgs related to this concept?
No. I mean, Dryden is trying to do his own cities or help build cities. I'm not totally sure. I talked to him once here at my house, or the house I live at. But it sounds like, they're trying to do something more similar to, I think, Tom, just like help gather these networks for people who are interested in building a city / build their own city.
Yeah. What sorts of thinkers do you find most inspiring in this space? Like whether it's people who are actually building things right now, or are you reading? I feel like there's a lot of literature from probably like art and sociology and anthropology about people thinking about like the future of cities and utopias. Sorry.
And helicopters.
Don't know what's going on. But no, I just wanted to ask you like who you find the most thoughtful in this space. Alive, dead or alive.
I guess ones who have actually done something about it. 2 that come to mind are Walt Disney and then the Irvine Company.
I was on Wikipedia. Have you read the Wikipedia on Irvine? It's like fascinating.
On the Irvine Company, I have, yeah.
Yeah. Like the Irvine City is basically a development owned by the Irvine Company, right?
Yeah, they've made, I think it's been crazy, like, it was like $30 billion over a span of like 90 years or something like that. Yeah, they basically bought, I think it was some 10,000 acre ranch or something, maybe it was even larger than that. And then they built a huge master plan for it. And then that's what they've been executing on since. But on the Walt Disney front, I think it's interesting because I don't think most people really acknowledge Walt Disney as one of the greatest visionaries of our like a long time, and all the different sorts of things he was thinking about outside of obviously just entertainment. And one of them was Epcot. Originally was supposed to be like a city of the future, like an always living city of the future. And Disney World was not supposed to be broken up into all these bits and pieces. It was going to have like Magic Kingdom as one part, Epcot and as like the city of the future, and then this like park where all the companies and organizations existed. and there was going to be a tram that ran through all of them. And like it'd be like, this is where you went on the weekends, this is where you live normally, and then this is where you go work during the weekdays. And they had this huge master plan for it where it had like different layers for different transportation systems, and everything from tram systems going between the like residential areas to the inner city to like underground, almost like boring company like tunnels where semi trucks would go and deliver all of the goods, but there'd only be the semi trucks flowing between them. And they just basically like had really planned this thing out. And this was a long time ago, back in 1963, I think, before he died, and they were just starting on it. And then he died, and the board chose to make it into another amusement park and wipe all of it. So it's definitely sad to see, but definitely something to go check out.
Totally. And DK just linked this. I feel like Disney has been coming up a strange amount of times in his lunch break. Truly, I'm so intrigued by all these things that this man dreamt up because I had no idea before. But another angel investor we had on, Tom, recommended this book in chat. I don't know if you read it.
Yeah, Walt Disney, American Original.
I have not. I don't. As sad. This is probably the saddest thing I could say. I don't read that much.
There's a lot you have to on.
Yeah, I think it gets at a lot of people. I find enjoyment, and I guess it's more of like the mastermind thesis. Like I like to go, and I have like a good set of mentors that I meet with like every week, and just kind of jam out on these kinds of ideas. And they all have their own kind of specialty in what they know. And so I feel like I pull a lot of my information and insights through discussion and questions with them more than anything.
Yeah. What are some of the topic areas that people would specialize in?
It's a little bit broader. So like whether that's like operationally or like me developing my vision or just even just startup knowledge in general. To give some like examples, one of them that I really, really love talking to, like recently we were discussing like, and still are, like languages in general, especially with GPT-3 becoming a thing. Like how can, there's this idea, I think, that at some point everyone will have a language of their own, something that is like basically a deep understanding of you and the way that you transmit your emotions, feelings, and like ideas. And what if you could, even on a very basic level, like what if you could leverage something like GPT-3 to even just translate between the English language and our own meanings between different words. So like, for instance, when you wake up in the morning and maybe you say good morning, or I say hello beautiful, or whatever it might be, but those things mean the same thing between you and I, but when I hear what you say, I interpret it differently than what you actually mean. And so what if you can create like a mutual understanding there, and then translate between the two on the fly, and basically allow people to understand and feel each other even deeper than currently, just by changing the English language itself, and interpreting what.
So each person would have their own kind of almost like a dialect of English, but English would still be kind of a translation layer. Is that sort of what you have in mind?
Yeah. Yes, basically. But I think where it starts to get more interesting is as the system starts to understand the way you use words, how you can go about creating more slang of your own, that then can translate into someone else's language of a sort, and what ends up happening longer term there.
Right.
Yeah, that's like a hyper individual level of like the concept of a dialect. And I feel like we often also pick up each other's mannerisms, and that's really interesting to track over time. Like, what phrases have I started using because I have a new roommate for the last few months, and yeah, that's really cool. But
yeah, I mean,
like, sorry, go ahead.
On another note there, and I think this is where it starts to get really interesting when you see how everything's converging in a direction. Like, As a side note, let's say that future did come into existence. Like, obviously, one of the big problems would be verbal communication, and like there would be no way to necessarily translate between those. But then you see things like AirPods coming in, normalizing wearing headphones all the time, and the fact that now you can almost like there's a filter layer to your AirPods that translates between everything, and so very quickly you see that this future could exist right now where all of us have our own language and possibly not even know that people are talking to each other in different ways. It's like this completely different world within the same world.
Totally.
I noticed those kinds of things emerging. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, like in certain relationships in my own life, I noticed that I have, kind of words and phrases that are shared between me and that one person, but they wouldn't necessarily make as much sense to the broad population. So I think those like dialects or those ideas are, they sort of naturally occur. Like it's like if you don't fight them and you just open yourself to play with them, they just naturally occur. I'm just thinking of some out loud Mishti. We have we always say day negative 50. That means something. If I just say day negative 50, most people probably don't know what that means, but it means something the way Mishti and I, converse. Or if I said only X, she probably knows what I mean, which is like these startup ideas of like only pets, instead of only fans.
It is interesting because I think what you start to see when language can become super specific and adjusting in those kinds of ways, it's like the emergent property of that is that you can have languages amongst groups and those things start to form as well. And I think these will just become like how we as a society and a species become more interconnected between each other, and how that communication then grows and connection grows in different ways.
Yeah, that's actually it also seems like it touches on.
Yeah, we've been talking about a lot of like how it's easier to go really deep into subcultures these days, whether it's through TikTok or like it's like almost easier for people to find really specific niches and like go really in, and they'll all have their own inside jokes and memes, and like if you're not in that, it might be complete nonsense to you, but for the people who are, it's like the first time they're finally finding their people on the internet, and it's like allowing for these deeper pockets. But what you're saying is kind of interesting because it also like overlays some layer of translatability across some of these.
Mm-hmm. And allows for emergent properties to come out of it. I think language is like, and the mentor I'm talking about and close friend is David Holes. He started a company called Leap Motion, which is like the hand tracking company. And I think, something he always talks about is that like language is kind of one of the first technologies of humanity, and how like language really is the like binding of everything. And like if you can create a new language, the amount of potential you unlock purely in that is probably the highest value add for the world than anything else.
It almost seems like in a sense a low-tech version of Neuralink, right? Like if you sort of look at what breakthroughs need to be achieved to make Neuralink work, there's many, and you could see something like that existing someday, but we actually have all the tools to make this idea work today, right? Yeah. Like we can just invent our own languages, invent our own communities, help transmit knowledge faster.
Yeah, and even if it's in like a small group, like let's say 5 people, like the hardest thing is probably getting a language adopted, but it'll become adopted very quickly if there shows clear value add. Even if it's just 5 people choose to work on a company together, but they all adopt this language that allows them to accelerate themselves like 100x faster than everyone else in the world, you'll like see people want to adopt it and become a part of it more.
Are there any specific examples of language, that you've sort of either created or adopted recently, maybe that are kind of part of the culture at Atmos, or that are maybe part of conversation you've had with David Holes, or?
No, I not.
It's hard to consciously think of them.
There aren't any, but I think there's a lot of like interesting research he's doing in the space, even beyond like language. I think language is just a piece of it. I think the core that is interesting. It's just like, how do you really understand humans on a deeper level? And something that like, I don't know how much of his stuff I should share. Like, it's his stuff, so
sure. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
We're not trying to get you in trouble, just trying to have fun.
No, it's more just like, you never know, like, even if you haven't talked about like what's private and public, like,
No, totally.
It's like, I don't, top of my mind, I don't really know what is and isn't.
Well, I was actually, like, on a slight tangent. I was going to ask you a little bit about, I think it's so valuable to have this like circle of trust and like guidance from mentors for anyone, especially someone like going off and starting their own thing. How did you build that up? And particularly like when you dropped out of college, what was your approach in like finding those people? Because I think having a key group of people early on probably makes like all the difference in some cases.
I honestly, this could be wrong. Like, this seems like too passive of an answer, but I feel like it just happens. Like, if you're aware of what you're looking for, like you're keeping your eyes and being conscious of that you're looking for those types of things, like it'll happen at the right moment. I think people try to accelerate these things and like brute force it, but in reality, it may not be the right moment. Like, you may stumble across this person, but if your paths are aligned and heading in the same direction, aka what a mentor ends up becoming, like it will make sense, and you'll see them again if that goes away, or the connection will form in that moment if it's the right time. And I think the other side of it is like they can definitely help accelerate things if it's the right. An example would be like one of my mentors who helps me more operationally on my company, like would not have been super good when we were in just the idea phase, I feel like. Because a lot of the things he's gotten me to think differently about are kind of the 1 to 100 phase, it feels like what are the compounding effects you're betting on and different variables like that, versus like what is the core problem you're trying to solve and like who is your core customer there. And yeah, that's why it feels like a lot of these things will just show themselves if you put yourself in the right position and you're conscious of what you're looking for.
Yeah, it reminds me, I just shared a link to a blog post from the Renaissance Collective where they had written a blog post called Our Finest Mentorship Moments. And it's really talking about mentorship as moments like you're talking about, where you sort of like organically stumble into moments instead of relationships. And then sometimes they optionally turn into relationships that are more longer term, repeated kind of iterated interactions. But I think sometimes, people are trying to solve for the longer term without first having the moment. So I think the moments feels like an organic way to establish some of them. So
I think it also requires a lot of like trust in the universe and like in the motion that's happening all around us that a lot of people don't have. But I feel this strong sense of like universal destiny, and that like everything is in motion, and like that motion will continue whether I like it or not. Like, you can try to push it and change it, but a lot of it is out of our control.
Are there pivotal things that maybe you've written online, or groups or orgs you've gotten connected to that feel like they've really unlocked one specific? Maybe there's a Slack group or a WhatsApp that you're on where you shared an idea and somebody connected on that idea. Do you have sort of a list in your mind of what those felt like if you sort of look back and connect the dots?
A lot of, like, at least the 3 closest people I have from a mentor perspective have all just been people I stumbled across. Like one was at a party, the other one was at a makerspace, and the other one was a mutual friend invited me to laser tag. Like,
that's
like there, and this is where I think people still don't understand the value of San Francisco and the Bay Area as a whole.
Right.
The fact that like all of these. And this is the funniest thing, is always when I'm questioning whether or not I should be here, one of these moments occurs, It's like this like weird destiny of like you have to stay, and it's like a reminder of the serendipity that happens and what it like. I don't think you'll ever be able to trade this.
Yeah,
right.
Really. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I resonate with the trust the universe bit. I think my closest mentor gave me that advice, and it was like almost very difficult to believe at a certain stage of my career when I was feeling super frustrated. But exactly what you're describing has also happened to me. Like that's how I met DK, literally over burritos, like in the mission somewhere. So, yeah,
awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
I know we're in trusting the universe. I feel like a lot of times people get into like holes, like depression holes, and I've come to, and I don't know if this is the right thing. Obviously, it's just what I do, but I find that if you treat depression as a sense of like lostness, like you lack a path or knowing where you're supposed to go next, then it puts you on a search every time for what it is that you're not like you're missing. And a lot of times that can just even be like lack of information. Like maybe you go talk to a few people and you figure some things out that then make you feel happy or excited again because you clearly know where you're heading and like what you're heading towards. And I feel like when you feel a sense of destiny, it's like super exciting. And so when you start feeling down again, it's this sense of like, okay, let me like figure out why I'm lost or like where I'm supposed to be going, and then trust your gut. And when you find it, you'll know. And then you feel that excitement again, using yourself as like a compass for where you should be heading.
Yeah. I think DK has to drop. I actually I had one more question if you have a second, but if DK you have to go, you can also.
I have to drop. I'm late I have to be on a call. But it was nice to connect and learn about Atmos, and thanks for sharing what you're building, Nate.
Yeah, thanks for having me.